Hey Playas, how you doing? Welcome back to Playas Guide. On this episode of Playas Guide, I'm going to be discussing collecting for the Nintendo Entertainment System, my favorite console, the NES. I've covered every other major Nintendo console so far on this channel, so please go and check out the videos and subscribe to the channel if you're a collector or a Nintendo fan. Now, eventually, I am going to get into Sony and Sega and Xbox, but because Nintendo has been my favorite for a long time and has made so many of my favorite consoles, like the NES, I thought I would go through those consoles and collecting for them first. So, the North American library for the Nintendo Entertainment System consists of 678 games. Now, you could take one or two away, so it could be 79 or 677. It depends what you count. Some people may count the Nintendo World Championship cartridges. Some might only count Nintendo World Championship as one because it's one game and there's two different variants. There is so much to discuss in NES collecting and so much to debate. So I'm going to throw that number out there, but if you want to count or subtract certain games from that, you're more than welcome to, and you're more than welcome to comment below some of these different discrepancies that you might have. And there is also 86 North American unlicensed games as well. Now, those are the bunch Color Dreams, Tengen, Chimerica, and there is the American game cartridges. There's only three of those, and there is the American Video Entertainment cartridges. There's also some other oddball stuff, but I'm going to get into that in another episode. And I'm also going to get into the rare games next week, so stick around, stay tuned for that. But for now, I'm just going to talk about general collecting for the NES. Because there's so much to cover, this is probably going to be a 3 or 4 part series. Now, if you really are into collecting and passionate about the NES and you're looking for some new and interesting games, there are some that we didn't get, such as there are 35 PAL releases that were only released in the PAL regions. There's also a bunch of different Famicom games. I don't know the number for all of them. If you do, please share. I would love to know what they are and how many there are out there that are exclusive to the Famicom, because I'm always interested in playing new games. Now, if you're already a subscriber and you're familiar with this channel, then you know that I'm a big fan of games that didn't get released and only a prototype exists as the original copy, and hopefully it was dumped and shared with the world so that others could play the game. I'm also a big fan of homebrew games, and what homebrew games are, they are new games made by one person or a small team of people who are big fans of the Nintendo Entertainment System. People also make homebrew games for other systems, but we're talking Nintendo here, and there is some really good ones. I've also made some videos about those too, so please check them out if you're interested in finding out more about homebrew games and what some good ones are. And Nintendo made all kinds of different peripherals. There was the Power Glove, and they made different strategy guides, and then they came out with the Nintendo Power magazines. They had like watches and stuff for kids. You could even get trash cans. The sky's the limit for Nintendo in the late 80s and early 90s. It seems like they came up with everything, and I love all of this stuff. It's so interesting and so collectible, especially the really early Mario stuff where Mario is just ugly. So, if you're into the NES era, there is tons and tons of stuff to collect for. Some of that stuff I showed you is just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more. I could dedicate an episode just to that. In fact, maybe I will in the future. Nintendo had also set up service centers and repair centers. Now, these service centers were equipped with a test station where they would test out controllers, power pads, and in order to test out this equipment, they had test cartridges. So there are 7 different test cartridges. which is actually debatable because the 7th would be the Duck Hunt test cartridge. I believe there's only one, maybe two known copies of this test cartridge. So if you have any information about it, please share in the comments. And, you know, if you want to say that, yes, it exists, no, it doesn't exist, please try to justify your reasoning behind that, because not all the facts are there and it's not quite clear. This is another thing that, you know, some people debate. There are 6 main test cartridges. The NTF2 test cartridge, which comes in both an yellow and a gray version, and this one is probably the most common. The second most common, I would say, is the Zelda test cartridge. However, there's a lot of Zelda fans out there, and all of these test cartridges are still very rare items, so this one tends to sell for a lot more than the other test cartridges. There's a Power Pad test cartridge, a Control Deck test cartridge, a Joystick test cartridge, and a Controller Port test cartridge. Now, these cartridges also, some of them are 5-screw and 3-screw. There's also some other different sort of oddities and odds and ends that were made possibly by these service centers, and some that weren't and were sent by Nintendo. Going back to the screw variants, so early on, Nintendo would use the Famicom adapter inside of many of the game packs in order to get some of the games out earlier. They then made their own boards. They then went away with the 2 screws, and this was all saving them money over time. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Not every 5-screw game is going to be like an early black box game necessarily. I don't know the reasoning why every game has 5-screw versus 3-screw, but generally that's the reason why. If you're really interested in NES collecting and you want to dive in deep, there's lots of different label variants as well. This is another thing I'm thinking about maybe doing an episode in the future. All things I could cover, but, you know, I'd really have to go into detail, and that's why they're not a part of this video. There's also a bunch of different pirated carts and multi-carts out there, and some of these are really neat. You can find some interesting Famicom games on there. There was a guy, I think it's one guy who went by Hang Sweeney, and he released a bunch of different, essentially almost early homebrew games that only got released on a lot of pirated game cartridges. And there's also the rumored, I don't know, maybe it does exist, you guys, another thing that's debatable is the Minnesota Lottery cartridge, and it's rumored to exist. There were write-ups back in the early 90s about this cartridge, but I don't think one has ever surfaced. Okay, so that is a general overview of NES collecting. If there's anything you think I missed, please mention it in the comments below, and I can do another video in the future covering those topics. Next week, I'm going to be rolling out a list of the rarest games on the NES, and then I'm going to be talking about some of the underrated rares. Now, I'm not talking about the uncommon games. Some of them are uncommon, some of them are rare and fall between, you know, uncommon and like the top tier rare stuff, but I'm going to talk more so about ones that I think are undervalued and go unnoticed, and you don't see them often. You see Bubble Bobble Part 2 more often than you see these games. I'm also going to do another episode about unlicensed NES games and dig a little bit deeper into some of those different companies that made unlicensed games that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. So if you're a fan of the NES and you want to find out more about it, or you're just a collector who's passionate about collecting and has information to share, or is looking to gain information, you found the right channel. Please subscribe to the channel. You could also find Playas Guide on Twitter, Instagram, Discord, and Twitch. We stream regularly on there. I have a few other streamers who are passionate about retro gaming who stream with me. Anyways, Until the next episode, that's it. Later, players.